Philosophy Tube, the YouTube channel, did an effective altruism video. So I've talked about effective altruism before. It's the idea that, one, you ought to give to charity, but two, that you should do it in a way that considers the most effective impact of your dollar. So generally, what that means is that if you were to spend, say, $100, that can help someone in your wealthier U.S. neighborhood a smaller amount, versus if you send it overseas, they can get like these pills that cost 30 cents each that cure parasites, potentially saving lives and sending a child back to school, changing the course of their life. So the idea of effective altruism is to ask yourself, if I allocate a certain amount of money to my charitable giving, how ought I do that to have the biggest utilitarian impact? And then, they go through it. So this video goes in and is critical of effective altruism for a number of reasons. I want to go through. I actually was surprised that I agreed because it seems like a pretty buttoned up philosophy. It's like, yeah, try to help in the best way possible. It's like, yeah, that's pretty clean. But here's what I think is fair. When you set something up like effective altruism, inevitably what happens is that somebody decides who counts as this. Somebody runs the math, somebody does the analysis. And that means that these handful of organizations, and in fact, the handful of people who pick the organizations, get a tremendous amount of power. Because one of the things that is not explicitly stated in effective altruism, but is kind of built into it, is that people want to help without really putting their heart into it. Like they want to give their money, and they want to give it in an intelligent way, but they would like to, and I can relate to this, be told, give to the anti-malaria fund or give to the whatever fund. And that you can get this class of people, similar to the people who run the ESGs with the stock market, who have total control and are therefore more easily corrupted, and are beacons of corruption for how this money ought to be allocated and spent. And so you get this very singular point of influence of, if you can get this one person, you can shift all this money, versus if people just gave based on their heart or who asked them for money that day, it's not as susceptible to that level of corruption. So I thought that was really interesting. And I also mentioned ESGs, which I was just thinking of as I watched this, which, if you don't know, are the environmental and social corporate governance scores that are given to stocks. And in America, we have these large pension funds. So if you're a police officer or a school teacher or whatever, you have your retirement savings that often will sit for like 40 years in these pension funds, and it'll hopefully grow over time with the U.S. economy. And when you retire, you have access to that. The people who control this have mandates sometimes by these pension funds to put it into a thing with a high ESG score, because, they go to the teachers or whatever and they say, do you want to do something that's socially responsible? And they say, yes, of course we do. Yeah. So then you wind up with the people who are labeling these having a tremendous amount of power. And this is the same thing that happened in the 2008 financial crisis with like the Moody's and the people who were rating the creditworthiness of the various tranches of securities. You get that one person to call a C-level risk, a AAA stock or not AAA stock, a AAA rated security, and you can cause an entire financial crisis because nobody's doing diligence beyond that, because there's so much trust put into this one person. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting, and I've been giving often to charity water. They're not one that has been explicitly recommended by effective altruism. But I don't think that attacked the core of effective altruism, which is, but you should still be mathematical in your approach to how you give to charity. Maybe don't trust these people, but do your own research, and effective altruism is still a safe philosophy.
So the YouTube video was saying that effective altruism actually isn't as effective and altruistic as, am I getting it?
I think what it is it didn't come extremely hard. It raised a lot of these questions. Okay. And these are the ones, this is actually more my reaction to it more than the video. The video talked about how, can you be a banker in this society and make a bunch of money, send 15% back, and call yourself a moral agent if you're supporting this system of capitalism? To me, that is actually not the critique that I found most compelling myself, but this is what I took from the video.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's helpful to know what they said and then what your critique is personally. So they said you can't be effectively altruistic if you're going to be a banker in a first world society.
The argument was that if the system needs change, that being effectively altruistic at Davos or as a very rich investment banker, she went to apparently a speech that they were doing for bankers, and claims that she said, you should all just quit your jobs. She was invited to speak at this thing, and it was just like, you should just quit.
There's no way. There's no point of you guys donating.
There's no point in asking yourself the moral question past this point of participation in the system.
Wow.
I don't know the detail that she went into regarding that. I think that's an interesting perspective, but I don't know that I'm quite as revolutionary as that. So what I took from it was that first piece. But the other thing that I took from it, which was not said in this, but this is my own, is that I've been wrestling, and I think talked before, with the idea that moral rules exist for people primarily as a crutch for their own disconnection. So like, I don't need a rule that tells me not to eat my own dog. Mm-hmm. I love him. It's not going to happen. I do need a moral rule to tell me not to eat a cow that I don't know, because I am disconnected from that cow. And honestly, were I closely connected, it would be easy for me. But because of globalization and my ability to get other people to do things and not look at where the stuff that impacts my life comes from, I can stay disconnected from those things. So we implement, and I think that exists even in your own life. So people, most or many people, don't need rules to not abuse themselves, except when they feel so disconnected from themselves that they resort to cutting and self-harm or self-destructive behaviors because they're disconnected. And then they need like some sort of moral injunction to like get up in the morning, stand up straight, not because you feel connected to yourself, because you like, this is the rule for how you're going to function in life to get past the fact of your own disconnection. And I've been trying in my life where I used to focus tremendously on morality. What is right? How do I align with that? Because I am disconnected from the
But
behaviors.
even with like a philosophy that was what? The golden rule of doing things?
Well, I guess what I would say is that
like your morality was based on what?
Back in the day?
Yeah.
A belief that there was a right way of doing things that I did not have access to, that I had to align myself with. Because you could be a bad person with very little effort. In fact, you were likely to drift into badness and harm and carelessness and selfishness unless you put a tremendous amount of effort and aligned by all of these rules of how you ought to behave in order to not fall into that pattern. And I saw that because we watched 12 Years a Slave, and I watched all the, Benedict Cumberbatch's character in that movie is this good slave master, and even Solomon Northup in that movie says, he's a good man, and the woman next to him says he's a slave owner. Like, what do you mean? And then I was like, oh shit, it's everyone condemns slave owners. What is the slavery of today? And that was where through, I don't want to get into it again, but that was where I was like, shit, factory farming is the slavery of today. It is the thing that we all participate in. We all call ourselves really good people, and they're going to look back on it in 250 years and say, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. I would never. How horrible are all of these people?
We're not buying local, like participating in a global market, which was like,
I'm sure there are others that I am sure might be that, but that was the one that stood out to me.
Yeah, that every day you're eating.
Yes, that it
have
was
a choice and you could do something.
And it is a saying that this type of creature, in the case of a slave, I don't mean to call him a creature, this is the parallel, like doesn't count, is not worthy of moral consideration, because in the days of slavery, their brains had a different shape, their skulls were different shaped, and all the reasons that they had to discount them as worthy of moral consideration and not deserving of the feeling of connectedness that you would feel. And the hypocrisy and the inconsistencies that it would occur. Like, they would have their house slave that they really liked and loved, but they would just be brutal to others. And it's like the same thing you see with animals, which is all these people freaking out whenever a dog is like, please, somebody save him. And then while they eat their cheeseburger. And it's...
Yeah, I hate when the horses get stabbed in the war movies. Yeah. I hate it.
While you eat a cheeseburger.
While I eat a cheeseburger.
Yes.
And I got you off your initial point, which was like, I asked you about your morality back in the day, and you were going towards like what you do now after... sort of reconciling with that, of trying to appeal to your morality or something. I don't know what your initial...
so this was my deeper feeling that I took from the effective altruism, which is effective altruism triple underlines that morality is meant to be a game played with your head. It's about rules that you abide by in order to move closer to being a good person in ways that you do not need to feel connected to. In fact, the point of effective altruism is to ignore your moral impulse. Your moral impulse might be help the next door neighbor or do this. And it's not to ignore that, but it's to say at least as important to that is to act without moral feeling or connection towards these other things which need you. And it is to have a whole other dimension of like what is right that is disconnected from what you feel another human. Like I don't feel connected in many times to the money that I donate compared to when I help someone that I know in my own life, even though it takes much more of my time and effort and I help them less compared to the money that I send to Charity Water. And it like gives you a pat on the back for that and says, this is the right way, or this is a better way of approaching morality. And I think that an interesting criticism, which I'm not 100% behind, but I think is interesting, that I'm feeling more is in the same way, I'm drawing a lot of parallels here. I feel like the way that I approached confidence and charisma is like this at the very beginning is like, this is how I'm going to copy confidence. I'm going to copy all of the external signs of confidence and try to get from the outside in. Morality is the same way. It's like, okay, I'm going to do all of the behaviors of a connected person who feels like they care about people in Africa or who feels like they care about cows in a hope that the outside in matters, or even with the belief that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I ever feel that level of connection. All that matters is that that well gets built and that cow doesn't get killed. And increasingly in my life, both with, the charisma stuff and morality, I'm wondering if there isn't, if that isn't now blocking me from a higher order of morality.
I imagine so. In both of those examples, it sounds like there has to be an audience, that you have to appear tall and confident to somebody rather than feel tall and confident. And you're getting into the feeling, but it's still for an audience. Like,
yes,
confidently sitting on your couch was not a question that you had. You know what I mean? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine with the altruistic donations, it's also like I'm doing the things and donating to the causes that on paper, when people say, do you donate? You're like, yeah, I do. Every year I donate an X amount of my salary, and they go, oh, you must be a good guy because you're appearing. And whether you have the feeling or not, it's still for that audience at a coffee shop to, like, who's your judge?
Yeah, well, you can argue, I see that, and that does exist in the morality one, but I think I would still give to the charity if you sealed my mouth shut, because my judge is what I imagine to be this, like, though I'm not religious in the traditional sense, like God.
Yeah.
Like this person who knows everything I've done that weighs the weight of my soul, if I am a good or a bad person. And if I could never tell a soul, I would still do it because I do feel, or have in the past felt, weighed in that manner. So I know what you're saying about the audience piece, and I think that exists, but it is not like a human audience that it is for. It is not for social standing it really is insignificant to me.
Yeah.
It is much more of a like, what do I need to do to be good is a fundamental thing. And that is, what do I, and so the fundamental charisma question that started it is, what do I need to do to make you like me? The fundamental question that I had here was, what do I need to do to be good? And a new question, which can take me a step backwards and makes me behave in ways that go, shit, I don't know if this is helpful to other people, is what makes me feel more connected? And it is a slower route. And I'm not saying that I'm going to withdraw my standard amount of money that I give to Charity Water, but I was like, some of the things that make me feel more connected are incredibly selfish. Like, it's a lot of money on myself for these therapy things that I get and these expensive MDMA sessions with expensive support afterwards, money that could have been sold elsewhere. It's, one day, hopefully what I would like to do is like go to Africa and see some of the wells instead of taking, and I might fly first class, instead of taking that money.
Greta Thunberg would not be happy with
I know. And building another well, which I recognize, like, that is not utilitarian. Now, the criticism that was in this Philosophy Tube video that made me realize it, that made, that I connected with this strand of thought that I'd already been having, was that effective altruism slants in the direction of the measurable, right? Because it can only count what can be measured. So like it wants to reduce everything. How many lives did you save? How many this did you do?
That's interesting.
And it can only so it slants towards things that are measurable. It has to.
Yeah. It's a definition of the word.
Yes, you have to be able to measure it. And it's like, well, this is the question. assuming that you can't measure it, but what is the broader impact of me becoming a more connected person over the course of my life and over the long term? Because effective altruism struggles to get to like, you know, the long-term impact of you patting someone on the back or saying hello or saying I love you more often in your life. And like those things are much more difficult to track through, measure outcomes of, which isn't to say that they don't have profound outcomes. Like if that's the question that I have is, am I limiting my vision to a very narrow set of like, we build a well and 10,000 people get access to water in a 3-year time span, versus if I focused more, or which I do, to be clear, not more. But if I considered it a moral act and a lovable act and a admirable act, and encourage myself and other people to do it more, to lean into with their funds and their energy, things that make them feel connected to other people, to animals, to the world, etc., rather than how do we get this well? What kind of world might we have, even from an outcome perspective, in 50 years?
Yeah.
And I actually think, now there's a bit of faith in this, but I can unpack it. Over the longer term, that connected world is better, because what you get when you don't do that is what we talked about first, which is you get people abusing the metrics. You get everybody wants to, you know, like check the box to be good, do the thing, do the environmental thing, and you get, when people aren't connected, they just want the box, and you get corrupt measurements. And that is not at first I was like, oh, well, that's just this, you know, that can happen, but you just get a different person. It's like, no, that's built into a system where people are fundamentally disconnected and only doing things to be good and not because they feel connected to it.